Fellas, in the first video of the day, we're going to be talking about the New Orleans Pelicans. We're kind of going around to a ton of different teams, kind of evaluating where they're at. And as I was thinking about, some of the brightest futures in the league, right? Of course, the Pelicans came to mind. I think amongst them and the Thunder and a handful of other teams, they're definitely in that mix for potentially the brightest future in the league. But I wanted to kind of talk about some issues that I have and some potential problems with this Pelicans quote-unquote rebuild, despite the fact they're only a couple of games out of the play-in game at the moment. I think it's still very much considered a rebuilding team. And not that, it's that they have no future or anything, but just some issues I have. It's things I want to talk out with you guys and kind of figure out, see if we're on the same page about some things about this roster as well as the direction of the team moving forward. But really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every single day on this channel, so it's a great place for the most consistent NBA content on YouTube. If you're new here, by the way, what's up? My name is Tucker. You can also leave a like rating on the videos as well, and you can check me out at various socials in a Linktree link down in the description below. With those things said, let's talk about the Pelicans. Let's talk about the rebuild. So overall, some good things about the Pelicans. Of course, Zion is incredible. He is I still, for some reason, I don't feel like people are talking about the season that he's having enough at 20 years old to be top 10 in the league in scoring, to be scoring more points on the field goal percentage that he is than anybody in modern NBA history. He's having a truly, truly historic season. For some reason, it doesn't feel like it's getting as much attention, and that's probably just because the Pelicans are not winning a ton of games. Although, as I said, they're only a few games out of the play-in game, which I think kind of everybody wants to see them in. I think most people, if they could, would cook out some of those other teams that are above them just to have the Pelicans in the play-in game, just like they'd like to have Zion in the All-Star game. So obviously plenty of positive things here. Zion, Ingram, the picks, whatever you think Lonzo could potentially be. There's some other young guys that are at least semi-interesting on this roster, and maybe down the road some other guys on this roster that will have some value when they become expiring contracts in Eric Bledsoe and Steven Adams. However, I do have some issues with the rebuild. Some of the minor things I have problems with before we get to the big stuff. You don't feel fantastic about any of the young guys outside of Ingram and Zion. Obviously, Lonzo being a guy that is pretty polarizing and is going to need to get paid. Obviously, you feel good about him, but you don't feel as good about him as you do, Zion and Ingram. And then just, like I said, some of the other young guys you're not sure about. You'd like to have more players that at least are kind of part of the long-term fit here. For example, in comparison to Oklahoma City, where they know that Lou Dort is a winning basketball player that's going to be good for them, for a while. Obviously, SGA, a couple of other guys in the roster as well. The other part of this is, of course, the picks come into play. With any significant rebuild now in the NBA, that is such a big part of the equation when you're evaluating a rebuild. And it's possible that the picks for New Orleans are not that great when you're looking at the Milwaukee picks, when you're looking at, the Lakers picks they got in the Drew Holiday and Anthony Davis trades respectively. There's no guarantee that those things are going to be anything better than 20 at best. Now, it's very difficult to project all the way out to 2027. But I think that at times people are just oh, you have future picks. It's a great part of the rebuild without properly evaluating, the value of those picks. Even now, even trying to project them out 6 years ahead of time. I think there are other teams for example, Oklahoma City, that have a leg up in that regard. And then just the coaching stuff, I think it's generally pretty well accepted that the Pelicans are one of the worst coach teams in the league. Van Gundy is not going to be the long-term guy there in terms of when the Pelicans are really good with Zion. I'd be shocked if Van Gundy is the coach when that happens. And so not having an answer to that question is certainly an issue. But what are the big things? What are the things that I truly have an issue with that would kind of lead to the title of this video the way that it is, being the way that it is? First and foremost, and we love to do this as NBA fans, I'll admit that, is questioning the fit of the two best players on the roster. We've done it with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid for years, and I think that at some point we're going to start asking that question about Zion and about Brandon Ingram, because I think most people were accepting that Zion's the guy. If you're picking between the two of this guy's going to be a superstar, that guy is Zion. And then you start to question, okay, well, A, is Ingram willing to be a number two option? And B, does he have the skill set that works well with Zion in being a number two option in general, or specific to being a number two option besides Zion? And I think that is certainly questionable. The other part of this is, are they ever going to be able to defend and be a good defensive team, assuming that they keep that duo and that pair of Ingram and Zion together? Again, I think is certainly a question mark. And then the last part of kind of my big issue here, and then we'll cover all these as a whole and talk about some possible counters to this, is it really difficult to build around Zion, right? Especially considering that the three-point shot is something that he still needs to develop, considering that he is primarily an on-ball player, despite, some of the stuff he can do in ball screens and in the dunker spot. He's most devastating for the most part when he has the ball in his hands, and that's when he's most quote-unquote unstoppable. he can't be, if he was taller and had longer arms, he could be the 5 and then problem solved. But he can't really be the 5, and you also can't have a guy that's clogging up the paint like Steven Adams to play alongside Zion, because Zion also can't shoot. And then in modern NBA, you can't have more than one guy on the floor that can't shoot, because it just messes with all the spacing of the other players. And it's just difficult, really, conceptually, to think about how do you build a roster around Zion that works, that can win a lot of games, and that fits with his very, very dominant yet specific skill set. So, with all those things considered, the argument could potentially be, well, with all those things, maybe even though the superstar potential is there with Zion, you would rather build around Ingram. He's a more traditional player. We've seen guys like Brandon Ingram before. A high-level wing scorer that is going to continue to grow as a playmaker and hopefully start to put in more effort defensively to be a really, really good player that you can build around a top-tier all-star level guy for the next 10 years. We've seen guys like Brandon Ingram before, and, you put traditional basketball players around that guy and it's going to work. You put spacing on the floor, you put a rim-protecting 5 on the floor, you give yourself some lineup versatility to play bigger or play smaller, you give him another star to play alongside so he doesn't have to do everything offensively, and you're a good team. We've seen that blueprint before. So the argument, if you're assuming that these guys don't fit, would maybe be in favor of Ingram in that scenario. Now, is the they don't fit thing an argument at this point? I tend to think that it is. And it's not the part of me coming out where it's like, oh, I want all these trades to happen, and it'd be really cool if all of a sudden Brandon Ingram was available. It's just in watching them, and it's two things. It's the mentality of Brandon Ingram, where he went from a highly coveted player in the draft to things not going great in LA, to LeBron showing up and having to be second fiddle. And that had to be a really frustrating experience for Brandon Ingram. And then he gets to New Orleans and he's awesome. And he's got to feel so fulfilled and so validated as a player. He's like, I am who I thought I was. Now everybody else knows it. I can be a number one option and score a ton of points. And then Zion shows up. And I just think that that's a really difficult mentality shift for a guy that is still very, very young, like as a person. Like, I think that's just very difficult to adjust from. You finally get the taste of what it's like to be a number one option, albeit on a team that didn't win a ton of games, but you still felt individually successful. And then for some other guy to just show up and take that away from you in a lot of people's eyes, not because of anything that Brandon Ingram is necessarily doing incorrectly, although he could be better defensively and he could definitely grow as a playmaker, but more so just because of the sheer talent level of the other guy. And I think that's going to be something that's really difficult for him to accept. And I'm not sure that their two offensive games really mesh well together. And again, I think you could argue that that has more to do with Zion than it does with Ingram, because of his relatively unique offensive style and some of the things that he brings to the table, as well as some of his weaknesses, some of the things he doesn't bring to the table. And so ultimately, there just feels like a lot of questions here for me. Now, obviously, it's a very promising rebuild to have the volume of picks, even if you want to question the quantity, to have the volume of picks that New Orleans has at their disposal is obviously a hugely positive thing. To have two young players on the level of Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson is not a bad thing. Now, is the fit going to be an issue at times? Maybe. But worst case, you're going to get value out of one of those two guys if you do decide to move on from them. So they've got a lot of things going for them. But again, if you want to compare them to, the brightest future in the league, you want to compare them to Oklahoma City in that respect, I feel like there's more direction. I feel like there's a bit more of a cohesive vision, and there's quite simply less question marks. There's less problems with what's happening in Oklahoma City compared to what's happening in New Orleans. I feel pretty good about their coach, because there's a scenario in which Oklahoma City could have like 10 wins right now and they have 20. Like, they are winning games with a talent level that just doesn't make a ton of sense. So I certainly feel better about the Oklahoma City coaching situation than I do about the New Orleans one. I think their picks are certainly better. And even though they don't have, I think you could make the argument that if you're ranking Brandon Ingram, Zion, and SGA, I think you could, I'm not saying I would, I think you could make the argument that SGA is the least talented of the three. I just think that he fits really, like, I don't think there's a question of like, how do you build a team around SGA? Where's his fit going to be? I don't think that's a question. I think it's pretty clear that he fits in a lot of different scenarios. He's proven that in his first couple of seasons in the NBA, because he's been in a different situation every time and he's fit well every time. And they've got other guys that just kind of fit, kind of work. Again, you would point to Dort. You would point to someone like Theo Maledon, who's having a good season, and they've been able to kind of draft and develop around the edges, whereas everything for New Orleans, revolves around Zion and Ingram. And even that is a bit flawed from a fit standpoint, I think you could argue. Whereas Oklahoma City, they have SGA who fits, Lou Dort who fits, promising picks. They have the coach. They have a more competent front office, at least a front office that has proven to be more competent. And all of those things, I think, point more towards a more positive and a brighter future in Oklahoma City in contrast to New Orleans. But that only is the case when you're comparing it specifically to, again, probably the brightest future in the league in Oklahoma City. This isn't necessarily a bad rebuild from New Orleans. They've got a lot of things going for them, but I think it's certainly flawed. And I just kind of wanted to talk about some of those flaws that I'm recognizing here for New Orleans. While not being wildly negative, I do think that it's worth talking about kind of the long term of this group, as they are going to have arguably one of the most interesting rebuilds in the league over the next year and a half to 2 years. Hopefully by that point, they're no longer rebuilding. But yeah, that's going to be the end of the first video of the day, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. As I said, I upload twice a day, every single day on this channel, so it's a great place for the most consistent NBA content on YouTube. You can leave a like rating on the videos as well if you're enjoying them, and you can check me out at various socials and a link down in the description below to hang out with me outside of the videos, as I mentioned as well. With all those things said, hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your Monday. Hope it's a good start to your week, and I will see you all next time.